We're now on the top of Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, and we're trying to figure out exactly what Koi is. The Gemara had assumed until this point on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph that Koi is a Safek Chaya, Safek Behema. Therefore, the Gemara came to the conclusion that certainly, without a doubt, a person would be enjoined from eating the chalev of a Koi because maybe there's a 50% chance that in fact it's a Behema. And now the Gemara is saying no. I need a drush of kol chalev to include the chalev of koi, because koi is birya bifnei atzma, which means it's neither a chaya nor a behema. It is a class unto itself. It's neither a min chaya nor a min behema. It's a min bifnei atzma. And now the Torah is going to address the following question: what about chalev? Is the chalev of koi awesome? And you and I would have said, well, look, it's not a behema, so how could the chalev be awesome? Therefore, the Torah says kol chalev. To teach me that as long as it's not a chaya, and in this case, it's a koi biri b'fnei atzma, therefore, its chalev is asur. And now the Gemara wants to prove that koi is, in fact, a birya b'fnei atzma. For that, we have to go back to the same chapter in Vayikra Zayin, but now we'll talk about the Iser Dam. It says, "V'chol dam lo sochlu b'chol moshvot sechem la'of villa behem." And in the Gemara Masechet Krisus on Daf Chafalv Kotza Brisa, that from this pasuk we derive what's called a klal uprat. And whenever you have a klal and a prat, then you have what's called a ribut. So the Torah started with a klal, kol dam lo sochelu. Then it went into a prat, la'of bila behema. And the klal now, kol dam, is coming to be marbe other kinds of living creatures. Their dam is prohibited, even though they don't fit neither into the category of oaf nor into the category of behema. And the Brisa in Krisus will quote it now because it's important for the Gemara we're about to learn. Ma prat mefurish davar sheish bo tuma, af kol davar sheish bo tuma. And the Gemara says that what are we coming to be marbe? Behema and oaf are explicit in the pasuk. Chaya is included under behema. And the Gemara quotes Rav Idi bar Ovin that the Brisa has in mind l'rabos dam koi, that the dam of a koi is osur b'achil and yichayv koretz. And the Gemara wants to prove from that, from Rav Idi bar Ovin's statement in the Gemara Krisus, that koi is a birya b'fnei atzma. Ilo tema hachi yehad yomar Rav Idi bar Ovin. That which the Brisa says, af kol davar sheish bo tuma hakavana l'asuyei koi, that the dam of koi is osur b'achila. Im tomer, if you're going to tell me koi is a sveikahu, if it's either a chaya or a behema, it's a kral rebuye sveika. Now he could even add another strength to this Gemara's kasha, because if it's a suffix chaya, suffix behema, then mimanav shach its dam is asur because chaya b'chlal behema. In any event, we don't need an extra drasha of kol, in this case kol dam, which is a klal, in order to include dam koi, as Rav Idi bar Ovin says, because we know that dam koi is asur, because it's either a behema or a chaya. Ella, but we must conclude that Rav Idi bar Ovin understood that koi is a birya b'fnei atzma, shiny, and therefore might be different from both a chaya and a behema. Now the pasuk has to teach me that there's an isra achilas dam in the case of koi. I don't know what the status of dam koi is. And if in the context of dam, Rav Idi bar Ovin is teaching me that koi is a birya b'fnei atzma, hachanami here too, with regard to the issue of chalev, the Brisa now is going to derive from kol chalev that the chalev of koi is asur, even though it's a birya b'fnei atzma, shiny, and therefore it's different from behema and from chaya, and therefore I need a ribui to teach me that the chalev of koi is asur. So just to summarize the following conclusion, we don't have a raya from this brisa, not for Rabbi Yochanan nor for Reish Lakish, from the fact that we needed a ribui for koi for an iser achilas chelev, that doesn't prove that the entire enterprise and drush of kol chelev in this price is only an asmachta, which would support Reish Lakish. It's very possible that this is not an asmachta. We need kol chelev for chelev of koi because koi is a birya b'fnei atz. And the Mishnah tells us that Yom Kippur is also b'achila v'shasiya, and the Gemara now wants to know how do we derive the Isra Achila and Shasiya on Yom Kippur. Rabbanon, the pasuk says in Parshas Achremos, b'chodesh hashvi'i b'asol l'chodesh ta'anu es nafshos seichem, inflict your souls. Yochalam, I think that you have to actively inflict pain in your body. Ta'anu es nafshos seichem, it's a mandate. And therefore, Yeshiv B'chama. If it's a hot day and he's sitting in the cool shade or he's in an air-conditioned room on Yom Kippur, he's got to go out and boil and broil in the sun. Oh, B'tzina. If it's a cold day and he's sitting in his, in his warm house, he's got to go out and freeze Kadeshi Yitztayr in order that he should be ma'ana himself. Fantastic svara. I mean, a havamina, maybe on Yom Kippur I should be sitting on pins in order to inflict pain on myself. Almud Lomer, no. Ta'anu inui is passive and not active, meaning inui means do not do X because X is antithetical to inui. How do I know this? Because that very same pasuk of Ta'anu es nafshos seichem says, V'chol malach lo sasu. We have a what we call smichus between the chi of inui and the isur malacha, and that contiguity is going to tell me that we have an analogy between the two. Ma malacha. What does malacha mean? It doesn't mean to do something actively. It means to create a state of passivity. B'shevi al taseh. Af inui nefesh b'shevi al taseh, meaning avoid ta'anugim, which would undermine the state of inui, like, for example, achila, shasir, rechitza, etc. But the Torah doesn't mean that you have to actively do something to bring yourself into a state of inui, to sit in the hot sun or freeze out in the cold. And just like malacha, the Isur malacha is shevi altas, so to the Isur inui is b'shevi altas. So the Gemara asks the Ema, Yosef b'shimsha v'chayim le. Maybe if he's sitting in the sun, right? Let's say he came out to sit on his porch at 7 a.m. and 2 hours passed, and now the sun is getting very hot. Is lo nemale kum tuv bitula. We're not going to allow him to pick himself up and seat himself in a shade. Or alternatively, Yosef Betula, V'karavle, he's sitting in a shade and it's getting very chilly. Maybe it's a cold Canadian day of Yom Kippur. If it's a late Yom Kippur, that could certainly happen. And lo nemale kum tu v'shimsha. We're not going to allow him to find some sort of warmer place where the sun is shining. He has to remain in the shade. And now he's being Makayim Inui B'Shevi Altasa. So the Gemara answers, Dumya the Malacha. Again, we go back to our paradigmic case of Isur Malacha. Ma Malacha lo chilakta ba. We don't make any distinction between this kind of Malacha and that kind of Malacha. Inui, lo techalik bo. You don't make distinctions. There's a uniform mitzvah of Inui, and therefore it cannot be that if he's sitting in the sun, he's got to remain in the sun and he can't go into the shade, etc., because then the mitzvah of Inui will change from scenario to scenario. If he's not sitting there, he doesn't have to sit, put himself into the, sun, etc., And don't tell me that there are all these distinctions. Where is he sitting and where is he? Does he have to pick himself up and go into the shade, pick himself up and go into the sun? Just like Malach is absolute, so too Inui is absolute. Now the Gemara quotes a different brisa that is going to derive the Iser Inu Yanachil and Shasia. Tanya Idach, the Pasuk says again in Parshas Achremos, Ta'anu is nafshel sechem yochel. I might think Yeshe b'chamu b'tzina v'yitztayer. He should make sure that he's sitting in a very hot place or a very cold place, and he's in a state of tar. Talmud lom v'chol malach lo sas ma malacha dover shechayoven alav b'makom acher af inui nefesh shechayoven aleha b'makom acher. Now, what does this mean that malacha is chayev aleha b'makom acher? What does the Gemara have, this brisa have in mind? And the answer is that we have an Isa Malach on both Yom Kippur and on Shabbos. And the Torah says in Parashat Kitisa, V'chmartem es ha-Shabbos ki kodesh ilachem, etc. Ki kol ha'osa b'malacha v'nichus ha-nefesh hahi mikerev ha-meh. So that malacha now, in the context of Yom Kippur, becomes quote unquote a davar shechayaven olav b'makom acher, because not only are you chayav for malacha on Yom Kippur, but asiyas malacha on Shabbos also generates a chiyuv, and therefore inui nefesh, it means that you should abstain from eating something which would be chayav, and in this case it means chayav kares b'makom acher. Can you give me an example of an achila where if I ate something, I incur a chiyuv kares other than Yom Kippur? And the answer is zeh pigul v'nosar. Pigul means that the kohen, when he shechted the animal or any of the avodos, he had a machshava lechlo chutz l'zmano. Nosar means that he left the basar hakodesh without burning it on the mizbeach or without eating it, and he left it till beyond its allotted time. And pigul and nosar both generate an iser kares if you eat the basar carbon, if it's pigul or nosar. And this is called chayav oleh b'makom acher. So therefore, sitting in the hot sun or freezing in the cold, that's not something that is chayav oleh b'makom acher. We have no other situation in which the Torah says that if you sit in the sun or in the shade, you're chayav kares. But what kind of achila is the Torah prohibiting under inu? It's got to be similar to malacha, which means davar shechayav oleh b'makom acher, and that would be pigul and nosar. So the brisa continues and says that if you're telling me that the only violation of the Isur Kares of Inu on Yom Kippur is when you chayv oleh kares b'makom acher is avi pigul v'nosa shebekares v'lo avius hatevel she'eno bekares. If a person eats tevel, which is one of the 5 species of grains, and there was no afrashas, trumas, and meisers, he's not chayav for eating a kezayis kares. He's chayav misa b'dei shamayim. The Gemara is assuming now that kares is more severe than misa b'dei shamayim, so tevel is lower on the totem pole of chumras ha'isurim than pigul and nosa, because pigul and nosa chayv kares. Talmud lomar ta'anu es nafsho seichem, and then it says v'nisem es nafsho seichem. Why did the Torah have to repeat the same thing twice? Riba, it's a ribui, and it's coming to include even an iser shechayoven oleh misa b'dei shamayim b'makom acher, and that's tevel. Avi tevel shu b'misa b'dei shamayim v'lo avius and nevela sheina b'misa. Can I exclude achilas nevela from the iser inui because it's not similar to malacha, nor to pigul and nosar, nor to tevel? It doesn't generate neither a chiyuv kares, and its violation as achila does not generate a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. It's only a chiyuv malchus. It's a lav. Talmud lomar ta'anu v'nisem es nafshel seichem riba. There's a third time the Torah says ta'anu v'nisem, a third language of inu, and that's coming to be marbe even nevela. Obvious and nevela true belav below obvious achulin she'enon belav. Would I be allowed to eat a potato or an apple on Yom Kippur? because there's no Isur Lav at all. And therefore it doesn't come under the description of Chayav and Alev B'Makom Acher, not in any sense, not even in Malchus. Because it's Chulin. Talmud Lomer V'Nisev is Nafshel Sechem a fourth time. It says Tanu V'Nisev, Riba, and now we're expanding the scope of the Isur Achil, the Isur Inui, to include even Chulin. Avi Achulin She'eno and Bekum Echol. I will include Chulin because there's no mitzvah to eat Chulin, but below obvious Hatruma he Bekum Echol. Maybe the Torah would say that when there's a mitzvah of Achila, that's not included under Inui, even after we have the 4 Ribuyim. And a Kohen would be allowed to eat Truma on Yom Kippur. Talmud Lomar, for this I need Tanu V'Nisev es Nafshel Sechem another time Ribu. The Brisa continues. Obvious at Truma she'eno b'bal tosir, v'lo obvious at kodshim she'en b'bal tosir. In the case of kodshim, not only is there a mitzvah to eat kodshim, but it's also to not eat kodshim. It's also to leave over the kodshim after Zman Achilasam, and that's an Isur of Nosa. The Torah says also Siru Meno Ad Boker. Talmud Lomer Ta'anu V'Nisev es Nafshel Sechem Ribu. And again, we have another Ribui for Achilas Kodshim. The Brisa continues, V'im Nafshecha Lomar, if you want to claim that we should not darshan from this Hekesh to Isur Malacha, is then I'm going to bring you another proof for the Isur Achila and Chesia. Hareu Omer, the pasuk says in Parshas Emor, "Va'avadati es hanefesh hahi mikerev hamah." And now we understand that the Torah's meaning is Inui shehu avedas hanefesh. That the Torah is saying that we have to afflict ourselves from that which is called quote unquote avedas hanefesh. Ezu zeh, what is included under avedas hanefesh? Zeh achilu chesia. Because eating and drinking will be makayim the nefesh. And if he won't eat and he won't drink for a certain period of time, he will die. Now, at the end of this brisa, the brisa says, in nafshecha omer, and then hareu omer ve'avadati sanefesh. So there was some sort of an argument in the middle of this brisa that we should not derive from the hekesh to Isur Malacha. My v'im nafshecha lomar. What was bothering the mind of the brisa that maybe the original drasha built on the analogy between Inui and Isur Malacha is not a valid analogy. If you'll answer, Be'arayos Kamishtoi Kra. When the Torah says V'Nisim es Nafshel Sechem, it's talking exclusively about Inui of Tashmish Hamita. And we find B'Makom Acher that there's a Chi of Kores for Tashmish Hamita in the case of Arayos. And Areu Omer Vavadati es HaNefesh. So therefore I need to prove that this is not correct and that the Isur Inui is not exclusively limited to Arayos, to Tashmish Hamita, because it says Vavadati es HaNefesh Meikerev Hamah. And we're going to derive from that Inui sheyesh ba'avedas nefesh ve'izeh zeh achilun shesiyah. The Bei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, we have a brisa now from the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael that the source for the obligation of Inu on Yom Kippur from Achil and Shasiyah is because Nemer Kan and Yom Kippur it says Inu Ta'anus Nafshel Sechem. The Nemer Lahalan with regard to the parsha of Man in Dvarim Perek Ches it says Inu, and we'll quote the pasuk now in Dvarim Perek Ches pasuk Gimel. It says Vayancha ve'yarivecha vayachilcha es hamon. The opening word in this pasuk is Vayancha milashon inui, and I will feed you man. Now, what is the derivation of inui? Inui, meaning we now have a gzeret shava between inui and Yom Kippur and the inui of man. What's the inui of man? After all, if you ate the man, you could taste anything you wanted to taste. Ma lahalan. With regard to achilas man, inui is re'avon. Now, what does re'avon mean? Re'avon means that you will go hungry. Afkan, so too here on Yom Kippur, the word inui means re'avon, you will go hungry. Now the Gemara is going to analyze this drush of the Bei Rabbi Shmuel, that inui means inui mirava'on, means inui from abstention from eating. The Nelif, why not learn a Gzeira Shava not to the Parsha of Man, but Miv Imtanes Benosai, which is in Bereshis Lamed Aleph Gabi Lavan. Lavan says to Yaakov, I'm going to be mashbia you, I'm imposing upon you an oath that you shouldn't be ma'ana benosai, my two daughters, Leah and Rachel. And what is the concept of being ma'ana benosai here? It means minias tashmish amita. You have to fulfill your duties within the framework of marriage. Now we're going to darshan that the Chi of Ina Yom Kippur is also minias tashmish amita. And therefore, your Gzeira Shav of Inu Inu cannot give you Achila and Chesia based on the Parsha of Man. The Gemara answers, done in Inu de Rabim, done in Inu de Rabim, Inu de Yachid. In Yom Kippur, we're talking about Inu de Rabim. And in the case of Man, we're addressing the word Inu Vayancha to all of Klal Yisrael. We're not going to derive an Gzeira Shava between Yom Kippur, which is an Inu de Rabim, to the case of Leah and Rachel, which is an Inui de Yochid. The Gemara asks another question. Why don't we learn Gzeira Shava mi Inui de Mitzrayim? In Shibud Mitzrayim Ksiv, it says, Vayareo sana mitzvah nizak el Hashem, Vayares on Yenu miloshen Inui, V'amrinon. And this is interesting. There's a drasha of the Chachamim from the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Zo Prishus Derech Eretz, it means Minias Tashmish. The Mitzrim separated the men from the women and they prevented them from having Tashmish Amita. And now we see that Inui is from Tashmish Amita. And now we're talking about Inui de Rabin in the case of Klal Yisrael and Mitzrayim. Ella, so the Gemara says, no, the reason for the drasha from Inui of Achilas Haman is because Donin Inui Bidei Shamayim Mi inui bidei shamayim, vein donim inui bidei shamayim, mi inui bidei adam. The Gzeira Shava of inui of Yom Kippurim is called inui bidei shamayim, meaning the Torah commands us to be in a state of affliction of inui. And the case of inui and achil saman is also bidei shamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to deny them food in order to test them and afflict them. The ain't done, but in the case of Inu Yom Kippur, which is an Inu B'dei Shamayim based on the mitzvah of the Torah, we're not going to derive that Inu from the Inu in the case of Bnei Adam, when the Mitzrim forced Bnei Yisrael to abstain from intimate relations in that Inu. That's called B'dei Adam. And also the case of Yaakov, when Lavan was Mashpia Yaakov, that's also a case of Inu B'dei Adam if Yaakov would deny his conjugal responsibilities. Now, once the Gemara mentions that we derive inui from Achilas Haman, the Gemara now wants to understand where was the inui in the context of man. It says in the Torah, and this again in Dvarim Perek Ches, I think it's Ekev, if I'm not mistaken. Machil chaman b'midbar, lemana nosecha, lemana nosecha leitivcha b'achrisecha. So it seems that Achilas Haman in the midbar was considered an inui, because the Torah opens up with the pasuk Machil chaman b'midbar, and then it says lemana noscha. Why is eating man an inui? And here we have machlokes between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. Chad Omer, according to one opinion, the man fell on a daily basis. There was nothing in the closets. The closets in the kitchen were empty of food. And you didn't know from one day to the other whether you'll survive in the midnight. There was no source of sustenance other than the man. And this is the way that God trained Bnei Israel for the midah of bitachon, to rely from one day to the other. But if a person doesn't have a pas b'salo, he doesn't have a piece of bread in his freezer for tomorrow, for a rainy day, then he's in a state of daga, of worry, of inui. And that's what it was in the test of the man. Adamar, Another interpretation of why man is called the inui, and this is based on a sugya in Masechet Chagiga, if I'm not mistaken. Just 1 second. Let's see if he tells you where it is. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong place. Dalid. All right, he doesn't tell you where it is. He just says the Gemara is going to take it up later on Daf Ayin Hey. But in any event, the Gemara establishes that a blind person, Nebuch, does not get satiated from his food. That only when you see your food do you feel satiated. Now, in the case of man, they saw the man, but they didn't see the food, meaning they had in mind it should taste like Jerry's. I'll call it Ben and Jerry's, but they didn't see Ben and Jerry's, and therefore they saw something abstract, which was man. They didn't get the full pleasure and satiation from eating man. And that's called Eino Roeh the Ochel. He doesn't see, and therefore he's not Sovea Me'achiloso, and that's Inu. Rav Yosef, Mikan Remez Le Sumin Sha'ochlin V'Ein Sveim. So I thought it was a sugya somewhere else. In the footnote here, he says that we should look in Bava Kama Pei Zayin. Okay, I'm not sure if that's relevant to our discussion. The Gemara in Bava Kama is going to establish that Rav Yosef was blind. And Rav Yosef himself, in the Parsha Vayancha in Man, he finds a smach to the fact that he's not satiated because he doesn't see his food. And basically, Rabbi Yosef felt it in his own experience, but you can find it as at least an allusion in the Torah itself in the Parsha of Man. Now, why doesn't Rav Yosef just simply say Mikan l'tzumet sha'ochel v'eina sovea? And the answer is that would be mashma, that he's referring to all the sumin in the world. He was only referring to himself at this point. Amar Abaye says that we can derive this from Eino Roeh es machol eino sovel koch mandi isle suudase lo lechle ela biyamama. If a person is eating a very lavish banquet, he should eat it during the day so that he could see and be satiated from his food. Again, if it's well lit, like in our time we have electricity, then night is just as good as day. Rab Zera, Micro, what's the pasuk from which we derive a remez that you should eat during the day? The Koheles says in Perek Vav, Tov Mara Einayim Mehaloch Nofesh. A person sees something with his eyes is better than his feeling it with his nefesh. Amrei Shlokish, Tov Mara Einayim Be'isha Yosem Migufo Shel Maisa. The benefit, the pleasure that a person gets from seeing a woman is even greater than the actual act of intimacy. And what Reish Lakish is trying to convey here is that we have to be very careful about our eyes, lest we feast our eyes on something that we're not allowed to see. Shenemar tov mara einayim mehaloch nefesh, quoting the same pasuk in Koheles that Rabbi Zera quoted. Rabbi Zera used it to teach us something about eating and how important it is to eat your Suda to the light of day. Reish Lakish is using the same pasuk to warn you about the corrosive impact of looking at the wrong thing, something that you shouldn't be seeing. Now the Gemara gives another source and offers another pasuk for Rabbi Ami and Rav Asi, and they will disagree about how to interpret the pasuk in Mishlei ki yitain bakos eno yishalach b'meishorim. And here we have Machlokas, Rabbi Ami and Rav Asi. Chana Omar, Kol anosein. Here we'll turn to Daf Ayin Hey and Aleph. Kol anosein eno bekoso. In other words, he loves drinking, meaning drinking intoxicated beverages. He gets drunk. Is arayas kulam domas alav kimisha. The yayin brings him to znus, and he's going to be matir for himself all kinds of znus, all kinds of arayas. Such is the power of intoxication. And we saw this also with regard to the contiguity between sota and nazir. Right? Aroa sota be kilkulo yazer atzma min hayayin. Chadam, another interpretation of this pasuk is called nosein eno bekoso. He loves getting drunk. Is kol kulo domalov kim mishar. In other words, everyone's mammon is heter. He thinks he's allowed to grab anyone's mammon. Because what happens is he's so addicted to intoxicating beverages that when he runs out of money because he spent so much, he's going to ask others, and if need be, he might steal from others money in order to keep up his addiction. And this is what alcoholic addiction is all about. And the Gemara brings another pasuk in Mishlei, Da'aga b'lev ish yashchena, and somebody who's worried that somebody will come and cause him a loss and damage his property. Yashchena. Yashchena is a lashon. Again, a machlokas between Rabbi Amir of Asichan Omar, Yisichena midaito. He should just put it out of his mind. The man has freedom of choice even as far as what he's thinking, and he should make sure to put away all his daigas in a compartment, lock him up, and not think about that. Adomar, and according to another opinion, Yisichena lacherim, he should talk it over with someone else. If he pours his heart out about all his worries in front of someone else, then maybe someone else, either because of their empathetic listening, will lower his level of daiga, or perhaps that person will give him a good, solid piece of advice. So this is where we're going to stop here on the top of Daf Ayin Hey. Tomorrow, Mr. Hashem, we have a gigantic Agadita, which would take about 5 hours to go through Daf Ayin Hey, Omid Aleph and Omid Beis. There are probably more words on this one single Daf Ayin Hey than in any other Daf in Shas, probably. So once again, we're going to have to do a little bit of a juggling, and I'll notify you, and you'll be able to hear that which we can't fit into 1 hour.